The police sirens wailed so loud my skull rattled, my dog barked like a maniac, and somewhere behind me a full-grown woman screamed something about a lunatic with a golden retriever. I swear to God, all I did was sneeze. One violent, poorly timed sneeze, and now I was sprinting across a downtown farmer's market, clutching a loaf of organic sourdough and dragging my very confused dog through a fountain like we were reenacting the final scene of Titanic. And if you think that's bad, just wait till you hear what happened when I finally looked up and locked eyes with the angriest, most breathtaking woman I had ever seen. Anyway, hi, I'm Ethan Cole. I'm 44 years old, I own a digital marketing agency that somehow makes obscene amounts of money. And despite what you're probably thinking, I'm painfully, ridiculously shy. Like, turn bright red when a barista spells my name correctly. Shy. My dog? That's Cooper. He's a 4-year-old golden retriever, with the emotional intelligence of a seasoned therapist and the impulse control of a caffeinated toddler. Together, we're basically a walking, barking, anxiety-ridden sitcom. The day started out like any other. Wake up at 6 a.m. to Cooper licking my face like a man on a mission. Spend a full 20 minutes trying to convince myself that showering is optional, and ultimately lose the argument because I'm a functioning adult with a deep-seated fear of smelling weird in public. The plan was simple. Grab coffee, hit the farmer's market, maybe pick up some overpriced tomatoes, and then retreat back to my man cave of solitude before anyone tried to make small talk. But fate, as it turns out, is a messy little drama queen. One minute I was casually browsing heirloom carrots, Cooper behaving himself for once, and the next, boom! Someone behind me popped a champagne bottle. Now Cooper, bless his golden soul, has exactly 2 fears in life: vacuum cleaners and unexpected loud noises. Instantly he bolted forward, yanking me with him like a water-skiing disaster on pause. My elbow knocked over a pyramid of artisanal honey jars. An old man cursed at me in Italian. And suddenly, I was in a full-on foot chase with my own dog through the most crowded part of the market. In a desperate attempt to stop the madness, I did what any sane, responsible adult would do. I threw myself onto Cooper's leash like I was trying to tackle a running back in the Super Bowl. It would have been heroic, even majestic, if not for the unfortunate placement of a decorative fountain directly in my path. One second I was airborne, the next, splash! I landed right in the water, clutching the leash and a random loaf of bread that had somehow joined the circus. People stared. Phones came out. I could already feel the TikTok fame brewing. And that's when she appeared. Towering over me, arms crossed, wearing a black leather jacket and the kind of boots that said, "I've seen things you couldn't survive," was the woman. Long dark hair, fierce brown eyes, and an expression that suggested she was 2 seconds away from either calling an ambulance or personally ending my life. Cooper, of course, immediately decided she was his new best friend and started trying to climb into her lap. "Seriously?" she said, voice like gravel and honey. "Is this your idea of a meet cute? Or are you just naturally this catastrophic?" Before I could respond, before I could even think about responding, a security guard started shouting something about pressing charges. And Cooper did the unthinkable. He stole her scarf and bolted. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering so hard I thought it might break my ribs, and met her eyes with what I prayed looked like a sincere apology, and not the desperate terror of a man about to be mauled by both security and karma. "Don't just stand there," she snapped, already chasing after my dog. "Unless you want him to start a riot." And just like that, my quiet Saturday turned into an adrenaline-soaked sprint through chaos, chasing a golden retriever who had declared war on public decorum. But trust me, this was only the beginning. If you've never tried chasing a golden retriever who thinks he's playing a live-action version of Capture the Flag, I strongly advise against it, especially if you value your dignity, your lungs, or your basic ability to move without looking like a drunken scarecrow. Cooper tore through the crowd with her scarf trailing behind him like some ridiculous medieval banner, weaving between market stalls, knocking over display racks, and leaving a path of pure, unfiltered destruction that would make a Category 5 hurricane look like a polite house guest. Somewhere between a vegan taco stand and a booth selling handmade soap shaped like woodland creatures, I lost one of my shoes. I have no idea how it happened. One second I was upright. The next I was hopping on one foot like a malfunctioning flamingo, trying to avoid stepping on shards of broken pottery while shouting, "I'm sorry," to every vendor in a 3-mile radius. The woman, whose scarf was still fluttering mockingly from Cooper's mouth, charged ahead of me with terrifying focus, her black boots slamming against the pavement with a rhythm that could only mean one thing. If I didn't catch my dog, she was going to. Meanwhile, Cooper had spotted what could only be described as the holy grail of distractions, a hot dog stand. I could see the exact moment his tiny dog brain decided that scarf theft was old news and grilled meat was the new mission. Without warning, he lunged for the stand, sending ketchup bottles flying and causing a small child to burst into tears. The hot dog vendor shouted something very colorful that I won't repeat here, but suffice it to say, I was rapidly becoming public enemy number one. Finally, fueled by pure humiliation and the kind of adrenaline usually reserved for fleeing bank robbers, I launched myself toward Cooper in one last desperate dive. I managed to grab the end of his leash, crash into a stack of folding chairs, and narrowly avoid being brained by a falling umbrella. Cooper yelped. I gasped, and we both collapsed into a tangled, panting heap right at the furious woman's feet. She snatched her soggy scarf out of Cooper's mouth, inspected it with a look of absolute horror, and then turned that same look on me. For a long, agonizing moment, she said nothing, just glared, just breathed, just radiated the kind of judgment that could reduce grown men to tears. And then, shockingly, unbelievably, she laughed. It started as a snort, low and involuntary, and then escalated into a full-blown, head-thrown-back, belly-aching laugh that drew even more attention than my earlier aquatic fountain dive. She laughed so hard she had to lean on a lamppost, tears streaming down her face, while Cooper, the little traitor, wagged his tail proudly like he'd just cured cancer. "You," she gasped between fits of laughter, "you are absolutely the worst thing that's happened to this market since the kale shortage of 19. I opened my mouth to apologize, to explain, to maybe offer to buy her a new scarf or at least a coffee as a bribe for not suing me. But before I could say a word, she wiped her eyes, smiled, and said, "I'm Haley." And just like that, the worst day of my life became the day I met her. But if you think that's where the chaos ends, oh buddy, you have no idea. Exactly 45 seconds after Haley introduced herself, a stocky security guard with a mustache that could only be described as aggressively vintage barreled toward us, huffing like a freight train fueled exclusively by rage and black coffee. Behind him, 2 additional guards flanked our position like we were dangerous criminals, and not just a damp, shoeless man and his emotionally unstable golden retriever. "Sir!" Mustache roared, his hand hovering dangerously close to a pair of zip-tie handcuffs. "You and your animal have caused extensive property damage, endangered civilians, and disrupted commerce." I glanced around at the wreckage, tipped over booths, shattered jars, a trail of wilted kale, and one traumatized mime holding an invisible police baton. Yep, we were definitely looking at a Class A disaster zone. Haley, still slightly breathless from laughter, straightened up, wiped her eyes, and without missing a beat, threw an arm around my shoulders like we were old college friends who regularly caused riots together. "Officer," she said smoothly, flashing a smile so dazzling that even Cooper sat down in awe, "this man was trying to prevent a much bigger incident." Mustache squinted, clearly suspicious but not immune to charisma. "How's that exactly?" "There was," Haley said gravely, leaning in conspiratorially, "an aggressive feral cat." She pointed toward the soap booth, where, purely by coincidence, a scruffy tabby was licking its paw with an air of total innocence. "This hero," she squeezed my shoulder, making my heart do strange, chaotic things, risked life and limb to protect the public. I stared at her, utterly speechless, because this woman was not only stunning and terrifying, she was also a world-class, pathological liar when it mattered most. Mustache hesitated. His brain, not built for this level of nuance, visibly struggled with the concept of cat heroics. Finally, after what felt like an entire geological epoch, he grunted and waved us off. "Get off the premises before I change my mind." Haley yanked me by the hand so fast I barely had time to grab my lost shoe and Cooper's leash before we were speed-walking toward the parking lot like 2 teenagers who'd just robbed a candy store. "You," I said when I finally found my voice again, "are absolutely insane." Haley just grinned. "You're welcome, hero man." And right then, as Cooper jumped into the backseat of my car and Haley slid into the passenger side like it was the most natural thing in the world, I realized something crucial. Whatever this was, it was only getting crazier from here. The parking lot buzzed with an energy that made my skin crawl, the kind of low-level chaos you only notice when your life has been moments away from total combustion for the past hour. I half expected someone to throw a net over us at any second, but somehow we made it to my car without a SWAT team descending from helicopters. I fumbled the keys like an idiot because apparently basic motor skills are a luxury my brain could no longer afford. Haley glanced around the lot, grinning like she was in on some giant cosmic joke, and then said, "You're taking me to lunch, hero man." It wasn't a question. It was a command delivered with so much confidence that I obeyed without even thinking. My tongue, that traitorous slab of useless muscle, flopped around my mouth uselessly while I managed to squeak out a very manly, "Okay." I pulled out of the lot, tires squeaking embarrassingly, and turned onto Main Street, trying to remember how to drive like a normal adult who hadn't just escaped a felony charge by the skin of his teeth. Haley kicked her boots up on the dashboard like she owned the vehicle, the state, and probably my soul. "Someplace with real food," she said, pointing dramatically toward the ocean like she was directing a pirate ship. "No kale, no quinoa. If I see one mason jar, I'm jumping out." I nodded so hard I practically gave myself whiplash. "Burgers it is," I croaked, aiming for the only diner I trusted not to try serving my lunch on a reclaimed skateboard. But the universe, in its infinite capacity for sadistic humor, had other plans. 2 blocks away from the diner, a huge road-closed sign loomed up, guarded by an army of orange cones and the world's most judgmental construction workers. I tried to turn, but a delivery truck chose that exact moment to sideswipe a parked Prius, sending up a shower of glass and setting off alarms so loud that Cooper started howling in the back seat like an air raid siren. Haley laughed so hard she nearly choked. "You really can't exist without attracting disasters, can you?" "Apparently not," I muttered, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my toes. The GPS rerouted us down a tiny side street that looked sketchier than a Craigslist ad for slightly used parachutes. I followed it because at this point, bad decisions were my entire brand. Halfway down the alley, the car lurched, sputtered, and died with a dramatic, shuddering sigh. I turned the key. Nothing. I tried again. Not even a click. Cooper whined from the back seat. Haley raised one eyebrow so high it nearly disappeared into her hairline. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, voice dripping with amused disbelief. I slammed my forehead against the steering wheel in defeat. And then, because fate is a vindictive little gremlin with a clipboard, it started raining. The rain came down in thick, angry sheets, pounding against the windshield like tiny, furious fists. Cooper whimpered pitifully from the back seat, curling himself into a ball so small he practically disappeared into the upholstery. Haley, ever the ray of chaotic sunshine, simply yanked the hood of her leather jacket over her head, flung open the passenger door, and shouted over the downpour, "Well, are you just going to sit there and cry, or are you going to help me find shelter before we drown?" Somehow I found the strength to follow her out into the storm, my one remaining shoe immediately squelching in a puddle the size of Lake Michigan. We sprinted, or rather she sprinted and I flailed, toward the only visible structure. A rundown diner with a flickering neon sign that said, "Open," in letters so desperate they practically begged for mercy. The bell above the door gave a miserable jingle as we stumbled inside, dripping all over the cracked linoleum floor. The place was almost completely empty, except for one guy sitting at the counter, hunched over a steaming mug of coffee, and a waitress who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Haley shook out her hair like a wet dog, causing a minor indoor rainstorm of her own, and dropped into a booth by the window with a sigh of satisfaction. I followed her lead, sliding into the cracked red vinyl seat across from her while trying to ignore the way my soaked jeans suctioned themselves to my legs with every miserable movement. The waitress shuffled over, chewing gum so aggressively it sounded like a personal vendetta. "What do you want?" Haley didn't even glance at the menu. "2 burgers, fries, coffee, whatever's fast and hot." The waitress nodded, scribbled something that looked suspiciously like a middle finger on her notepad, and trudged back to the kitchen. That's when I noticed the guy at the counter was staring at us. Not in the curious, "what the heck happened to you" way most people did. No, this stare was sharper, more calculating, like he was trying to solve a very complicated math problem that somehow involved us. "Don't look now," I muttered, pretending to wipe rain from my eyes. "But we have an admirer." Haley leaned back against the booth, stretched her arms above her head like a cat waking from a nap, and said in a voice loud enough for the entire diner to hear, "Maybe he's just impressed by your wet rat aesthetic." The guy stood up, slowly, deliberately, and started walking toward us. Cooper, who had wedged himself under the booth like a furry submarine, gave a low growl. "Relax," Haley said, still perfectly calm. "Worst case scenario, you get to use that loaf of bread you stole as a weapon." I laughed nervously, then realized she wasn't joking. The man reached our booth, slid his hands into the pockets of his oversized jacket, and said in a voice as smooth and dangerous as black ice, "You folks seem like you could use a little assistance." I opened my mouth to politely decline whatever help he was offering, but Haley beat me to it. "Depends," she said, cocking her head. "Are you offering help? Or trouble?" He smiled, and somehow that smile was the most alarming thing yet. I had a sinking feeling, deep and certain, that we were about to find out. The man slid into the booth next to me like he owned the place, setting off every internal alarm my brain had left. Cooper growled louder, his hackles up, but the guy didn't even flinch. He leaned in close enough that I could smell his aftershave. Cheap, sharp, and trying way too hard. "Name's Vince," he said, tapping a finger against the battered tabletop like he had some kind of secret to sell. "And you two look like you're in a spot of trouble." "We're fine," I said immediately, even though I was still damp, shoeless, and shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. Haley kicked me under the table, hard, and smiled sweetly. "Depends what kind of help you're offering, Vince." He grinned, all teeth and no warmth, and pulled something out of his jacket. For one horrifying second, I thought it was a weapon, but it was just a crumpled business card. He slid it across the table to me with a greasy wink. "I'm a problem solver," Vince said. "Lost dog, angry market vendors, broken down car in a sketchy alley? You're lucky you ran into me." I picked up the card. It was laminated, weirdly sticky, and simply said, "Vince, anything, anytime, no questions." I looked at Haley. She looked at me. We both looked at Vince, who was smiling like the shark in Jaws right before it eats the boat. "So, what's the catch?" Haley asked, narrowing her eyes. Vince chuckled. "No catch. Just, one day I might call on you for a favor. Nothing big, little thing. A pay-it-forward kind of deal." Every survival instinct I had, trust me they were few, and usually drowned out by social anxiety, was screaming at me to run. But then, the waitress slammed our burgers on the table with enough force to rattle the salt shakers, and Haley, being Haley, grabbed a fry and popped it into her mouth like she had all the time in the world. "We'll think about it," she said breezily. Vince's smile tightened, just a hair. "Don't think too long." Then he slid out of the booth and disappeared into the rain, leaving behind a puddle, a laminated card, and a creeping sense of doom that settled over me like a wet blanket. Haley crunched another fry, completely unfazed. "Well," she said cheerfully, "this day just keeps getting weirder, huh?" I stared at the card, wondering what kind of cosmic pit we just started sliding into. And then Cooper barked once, sharp, urgent, and bolted out from under the booth, leash trailing behind him, straight out the diner door. Without even thinking, we dropped our burgers and ran after him. Because of course we did. The second we burst out into the rain, we realized two crucial things. One, Cooper was not just running. He was pursuing something. And two, whatever he was chasing had no idea it was about to become part of the ongoing disaster film that was currently my life. Ahead of us, a guy in a bright yellow slicker clutched a massive brown paper bag to his chest like it contained the crown jewels. He was sprinting down the street, weaving through puddles and glancing back in terror. Not at us, but at Cooper, who was barreling after him with the intensity of a heat-seeking missile. "Tell me," Haley gasped between strides, "that our dog, your dog, is not about to commit armed robbery." "I don't think it's armed," I wheezed, soaked to the bone and barely keeping pace. Maybe just heavily breaded." The man in the slicker slipped on the wet pavement, skidding wildly but somehow staying upright. Cooper gained ground, tongue flapping out the side of his mouth like a golden blur of doom. Behind us, I heard the diner waitress shouting something about calling the real cops this time, which was just fantastic news. "Cooper!" I screamed. "Sit! Stay! Don't commit a felony!" It was useless. Cooper had already leapt into the air, mouth wide open like a cartoon shark, and latched onto the bottom of the slicker. The man shrieked, an actual high-pitched shriek, and flung the paper bag skyward. And because the universe loves irony, guess what rained down from the heavens? Pastries. Dozens of them. Muffins, croissants, eclairs. A full, majestic avalanche of baked goods, plummeting from the sky like some unholy blessing. Cooper abandoned his assault on the man's coat immediately, turning his full attention to gathering as many treats as caninely possible. Haley skidded to a stop, nearly wiping out, and stared up at the raining pastries in total, open-mouthed wonder. "Is this," she said in a voice filled with awe, "heaven?" I would have answered, but at that moment the man in the slicker, now covered in dog slobber and missing half his dignity, screeched, "He's a menace! You need to control your psycho dog." And then he pointed, not at me, but at Haley. "Her!" he bellowed. "I recognize her. She's the reason I got banned from the last street fair." Haley blinked, rain dripping down her nose. "What?" The man jabbed a furious finger. "You're the one who set loose the goats!" I whipped my head toward Haley so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. "Goats?" I croaked. Haley's face split into the world's most unapologetic grin. "Long story," she said, as Cooper pranced proudly back to us with a giant, soggy muffin clamped in his jaws. And right then, standing in the rain, soaked to the bone, pelted by pastries, and apparently now complicit in multiple public crimes, I realized something horrifyingly inevitable. This was the most fun I had ever had in my entire life, and it was only going to get worse and way, way better from here. We stumbled out of the diner into the downpour, Cooper leading the charge with his soggy muffin prize clutched proudly in his jaws. Haley laughed breathlessly, shoving her wet hair out of her face as we darted under the nearest awning, still dripping and shivering, but somehow high on the ridiculousness of it all. "Well," she panted, glancing around the deserted street, "at least we're not being chased by security this time." I leaned against the brick wall, trying to catch my breath, watching as Cooper flopped down at our feet like a conquering hero. For a fleeting moment, it almost felt normal. Two soaked strangers, a troublesome dog, and the aftermath of a minor food-related crime. Then the front door of the diner slammed open, and Vince stormed out into the rain, his laminated business card still clutched in his hand like a grudge. "You think you can just walk away?" he shouted over the rain, his face twisted in a sneer that made my stomach knot. Haley stiffened beside me, her easygoing smile fading like mist. "We didn't agree to anything," she called back calmly. "You offered, we declined." Vince stalked closer, ignoring the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "You owe me now. You brought trouble to my spot. You cost me business." I stepped forward, heart hammering in my chest. "Look, man, we don't want any trouble. Just let us go." Vince's laugh was short and humorless. "Trouble already found you, pretty boy." Before either of us could react, he whistled sharply and two large, rough-looking men appeared from around the corner, blocking the sidewalk like human brick walls. Panic spiked through me, sharp and electric. This wasn't some slapstick market chase anymore. This was real. Haley grabbed my hand without hesitation. "Run," she whispered, and this time I didn't argue. We bolted, Cooper scrambling after us, his muffin forgotten. We tore through puddles, slipped on slick asphalt, and dodged parked cars like our lives depended on it. Because they probably did. "This way!" Haley yanked me into a narrow side street lined with empty loading docks. For a second I thought we might lose them, until I heard heavy footsteps pounding after us. "Split up!" Haley gasped, shoving me toward a fenced-in alley. "I'll meet you back at the car." "What car?" I shouted after her, but she was already gone, swallowed by the rain and shadows. Left with no choice, I ducked through the fence opening, dragging Cooper with me, heart slamming against my ribs. Behind us, Vince's men thundered past, cursing and shouting. We pressed ourselves against the wet brick wall, barely breathing until the footsteps faded. I sank to the ground, soaked, freezing, and shaken to the core. And all I could think about over and over again was one terrifying thought. Haley was still out there, and I had no idea if I would ever see her again. I didn't wait long. The second the footsteps faded into the rain, I scrambled to my feet, clutching Cooper's leash so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had no plan, no direction, nothing but a gut-deep certainty that if I didn't find Haley right now, something terrible would happen. We sprinted back toward the street, ducking behind dumpsters and parked cars. I had no idea where she could have gone, no idea how many of Vince's goons were still lurking nearby, but I wasn't about to sit still and find out. Through the blur of rain, I caught a glimpse of her, darting across an intersection, heading toward the old parking garage by the waterfront. I whistled sharply, and Cooper took off like a shot, dragging me behind him like a human kite. When we reached the garage, I could hear shouting, angry, panicked. I stumbled up the crumbling concrete ramp just in time to see Haley cornered between two of Vince's guys, her back against a rusted-out sedan. She looked at me, not with fear, but with fierce, furious determination. "Stay back!" she yelled. Of course, I did the exact opposite. Fueled by adrenaline, stupidity, and a borderline suicidal sense of loyalty, I charged. Cooper, sensing my mood, launched himself at the nearest guy with all the enthusiasm of a golden retriever protecting his favorite squeaky toy. Chaos exploded, One of the thugs tried to grab Haley, but she ducked under his arm and slammed her elbow into his ribs with a crunch that made even me wince. Cooper latched onto the other guy's pant leg, spinning him in circles like a crazed maypole dancer. I grabbed Haley's hand and pulled her free. "Come on!" I shouted. We bolted toward the stairwell. I half-dragged, half-carried Cooper, who was still growling like a tiny, furious bear. We flew down the stairs, boots pounding, hearts hammering, breath burning in our lungs. Out the back exit, into the storm, into freedom. We didn't stop until we reached my car, blessedly untouched, parked 2 streets over. I fumbled the keys, cursing under my breath, and we piled inside, slamming the doors just as headlights swung around the corner behind us. "Drive!" Haley gasped, laughing hysterically. I did. Tires squealed, rain splattered against the windshield, and Cooper barked triumphantly from the back seat like he had just won the Super Bowl. We didn't slow down until we hit the highway, city lights fading behind us. Silence fell. The good kind. The kind thick with relief and adrenaline and something else. Something heavy and thrilling and terrifying. Haley turned to me, soaked and bruised and grinning like a maniac. "You're completely insane," she said. "You started it," I said hoarsely. And then, because it felt inevitable, I leaned across the seat and kissed her. She kissed me back like she had been waiting for it all day. When we finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine and whispered, "You know you're stuck with me now, right?" I laughed, still shaking, still tasting rain and fear and her. "I was hoping you'd say that." Cooper barked once, loud and decisive, as if sealing the deal. And somewhere between the chaos and the catastrophe, between the soaked shoes and the stolen pastries and the insane, impossible adventure, I realized I wasn't running anymore. I was exactly where I wanted to be.